So today we will talk about cellular transport, and we're going to talk about the two main types, passive and active. So before we discuss the cell transport processes, we're first going to talk about solute and solvents. So how things get in and out, we need to know these words. Solute is a substance that would be dissolved. So here, if we have salt, it would be the salt. Solvent would be the substance that is dissolving. So in this case, it would be the water. In aqueous solutions, the solvent is always water. So here we have a saltwater solution. Our solvent is water, our solute is salt. And in cytoplasm in our cells, we have an aqueous solution. So all cells are contained within a boundary of the cell membrane. This is some pictures of the cell membrane here. And eukaryotic cells also have organelles on the inside, which also have their plasma membrane. So not only do we have the outside cell membrane, but then we'll have a nuclear membrane, a mitochondrial membrane, different membranes like that. These membranes help control which molecules go in and out of the cell and its organelles. So the membranes are really important to allow things in and out. So membranes are made mostly of a very special lipid molecule known as a phospholipid. So these phospholipids are arranged in a bilayer, and bilayer means that we have two layers of phospholipids and the tails will be towards each other. So membranes also allow cells to communicate with one another and also with the outside world. And this is how your cells respond to their environment and to each other. So this cell membrane here we have helps maintain homeostasis, which is a very important word, by regulating which molecules are going to come in and out of the cell. So remember, homeostasis means to regulate the steady balance of nutrients and water. So helping to regulate the steady balance of nutrients and water in the cell is vital to the cell's survival. So the cell membrane and the other membranes play a very important part. So now we will talk about passive transport systems. We have our three here that we discussed a little bit in the reading, but now we're going to go a little bit more into them. So there's several processes for moving solutes in and out without using energy. So remember, when we talk about passive, we are not using any energy whatsoever. So any process that allows molecules into and out of the cell without using energy is a form of passive transport. Diffusion is the process of very small solutes moving directly through the membrane. So think of carbon dioxide, oxygen, different things like that. And we have very small things and they fit through the cell membrane and they can just pass through. So during diffusion, molecules will always travel from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. And here in our picture we have a high concentration on the outside of the cell and no concentration on the inside, and then slowly through time we have the molecules diffuse into the cell until we reach equilibrium and we have the same amount on both sides. Next we have facilitated diffusion. So some molecules are too large to have an electrical charge and cannot go directly through the membrane. So if you have really big molecules, they're not going to be able to fit through the phospholipid bilayer, and they need these special little channels or carrier proteins. So these protein channels or carrier proteins facilitate the diffusion of these larger or charged solutes across the membrane through facilitated diffusion. So we still have things coming in, but they're going through different avenues, not through the membrane itself or the phospholipid bilayer. Remember, because this is still a form of diffusion, these solutes still travel from an area of high concentration to low concentration, and we still mean that we do not require any energy from the cell. Our last type of passive transport is osmosis, and Water is really an important molecule in and around our cells because of its ability to be a great solvent. So remember that word solvent means to be able to dissolve things. So water dissolves a lot of things. The movement of water into and out of the cell is known as osmosis. So because water is a solvent and not a solute, we kind of have to think about it differently. So water is able to move across the membrane by simple diffusion, but because it's so small, but we don't talk about solvents in the same way as solutes. So we don't talk about high concentration to low concentration with water. We talk about how it goes from where it's most pure, purest, to where it's least pure. But it's basically the same thing. We're going from where we have a lot of water molecules to where we have not so many. When a cell is in a hypertonic solution, so here we have a hypertonic solution, it has a higher concentration of solutes, so dissolved particles, on the outside of the cell. So out here we will have a lot of like salt or sugar, and this is what the cells will look like. So water travels out of the cell towards the less pure solution, and the cell will shrink and shrivel. So in this solution, we might have a lot of salt on the outside. So the water that was inside of our cells has to move out to kind of reach equilibrium or homeostasis. And then that makes the cells shrink because now they don't have that water anymore. Hypotonic, so when a cell is in a hypotonic solution, there's a lower concentration of solutes on the outside. So the water will travel into the cell towards the less pure solution, and the cell will swell and can burst. So say we have some cells and we put them in distilled water, which is almost pure water. These cells, because they have stuff inside like sodium and glucose and different things like that, are not as pure as the distilled water on the outside. So the water from the outside will move into the cell to reach equilibrium of water, and then these cells will get bigger and bigger and they can eventually burst. Then we have isotonic. So isotonic, there are the same concentrations of solutes on the inside as their outside. So here we have the same amount of solutes outside the cell as we have inside the cell. And we can see our red blood cells there. So there's no net movement. What we mean by net movement is there's not going to be a big difference of the concentration of solutes in or out, but water will still move in. So as one water molecule moves in, one will move out. And the cell maintains a steady balance of water. So remember that. Next, we have active transport, the second big type of transport. Some ions and molecules must be forced across the cell membrane. So using the cell's energy, this involves pumping solutes into and out of the cell. So the way it's forced is by these pumping actions. Any process that requires energy to move solutes is known as active transport. So here we have an example of it. We have energy being used in order to push things in or out. So active transport is important for moving molecules against their concentration gradient. So remember, concentration gradient just means from high to low, but this time we're going in the opposite direction. So this means that we were traveling from a low concentration to a high concentration, and this is why it requires energy. Here are two types. We have endocytosis and exocytosis. We'll talk about endocytosis first. So these cells can engulf molecules from the outside of the cell through a process called endocytosis. And a small piece of the membrane is pinched off, creating a vesicle with the solutes on the inside. Since this process requires energy, it's a form of active transport. So here we have some molecules that we need to bring in, or some proteins. The vesicle will actually be created here, and so it'll engulf this and bring it in and send it to where it needs to go. So vesicles can also join the membrane and expel their content. So here we have a vesicle being made and it's pushing it out. It's pushing it out and it's going to like join the cell membrane so that way it can release these contents. So remember, this is known as exocytosis. So remember, endo means inside of or enter or come in, and exo means outside of, okay, or exit, get out of. So think of like an exoskeleton, it's on the outside. Okay, so now that is the end of our notes. Make sure you wrote everything that was in green and in red, and we will see you tomorrow.